Waltz of the Scarecrow by Constance W. McGeorge. Sarah awoke with a start. A loud noise shook the ceiling above her head. She threw back the quilt, jumped into her overalls, and was heading for the attic when she heard Grandma calling her downstairs for breakfast. The scent of pancakes and maple syrup filled the kitchen. "What's that noise in the attic?" Sarah asked her grandmother. "Oh, that's just Grandpa," Grandma began to explain. But before she could say more, Grandpa appeared. He was carrying a large bundle of clothes. "Good morning, Sarah," he said. Then he marched straight through the kitchen and out the back door. "I'll be in the barn," he called out as the screen door closed behind him. "What's Grandpa doing?" asked Sarah. "You'll see," Grandma answered with a smile. "But first, let's eat our pancakes." Sarah hurried through breakfast, then found Grandpa in the barn. He was sorting through the bundle of clothes from the attic. Sarah watched him carefully unfold a man's evening coat with tails. Shaking out the wrinkles, he laid the coat down gently. Then he straightened the brim of the shiny top hat. Next, he unwrapped a blue satin gown. The sleeves of the coat were patched, and the gown had faded from a dark indigo to a sun-bleached blue. But still, they were the most beautiful clothes Sarah had ever seen. "Sarah, my dear," Grandpa announced, "crops are full and harvest is near. It's time to make scarecrows." "But I thought scarecrows only wore raggedy old clothes," asked Sarah. "Not our scarecrows," answered Grandma. With her sewing basket in hand, Grandma sat down on a milking stool and set to work mending a tear in the faded blue gown. Grandpa untied a bale of straw and began stuffing the old clothes. Sarah helped, buttoning buttons and filling sleeves and gloves with straw. Then she and Grandma braided yarn for hair and sewed it around faces made of old pillowcases. Finally, Grandma placed the top hat on the head of one scarecrow, and Sarah placed a hat with silk flowers on the head of the other. As Sarah helped Grandma and Grandpa carry the scarecrows into the cornfield, she noticed a pair of scarecrows in the field across the road. One was wearing a black topcoat and the other a bright red ball gown. In the neighbor's garden she saw another pair of scarecrows dressed in fancy clothes too. "Grandpa!" Sarah cried. "All the scarecrows are dressed up!" Grandpa sat down on an old tree stump and motioned to Sarah to sit beside him. "Why, it's a tradition here," he said. "It all started one summer long ago. That year we had the best crops we'd ever seen. The corn grew a foot taller than usual, and there were more pumpkins on the vines than we could count. Even the sunflowers were brighter that year than anyone could remember. To celebrate our bounty, a harvest ball was planned. Folks sent away to the city for fancy clothes, evening coats and top hats, ball gowns and high-heeled shoes. The town was decorated with garlands and lanterns, and an orchestra came all the way from Riverton to play. At dusk, on the night of the ball, we dressed up in our fine new clothes and strutted into town. We were so excited, we didn't even notice the dark cloud approaching from the west. As the orchestra began to play and we started to dance, the cloud came closer and closer. As it turned out, it wasn't a dark cloud at all. It was a swarm of hungry birds, and they were after our crops. Screeching and cawing, the birds picked at the corn, pulled at the beans, and poked at the pumpkins. The orchestra stopped playing, and we ran into the field, shouting and shaking our fists. Well, those birds took one look at our black coats flapping and our colorful dresses billowing, and they took flight back into the evening sky. We must have been a sight, running through the fields, our fancy clothes flashing in the twilight. Luckily, our food from the coming year was saved. But worry was on everyone's mind. What would we do if the birds returned? Without a word, we knew what we had to do. We hurried home and changed into work shirts and overalls. We cleaned our coats and mended our gowns, and then we stuffed them all with straw. One by one, under the rising moon, the fanciest scarecrows anyone had ever seen began to appear in the fields. And do you know what? The birds stayed away, and they have stayed away every year since, Grandpa concluded. But there's more to the story, said Grandma, her voice nearly a whisper. Sarah moved closer to hear every word. Some folks say that when the crops are full and the harvest moon rises in the sky, a wind blows in from the south. The corn stalks sway, and the faint sound of music drifts through the fields. Others say they've heard the sounds of rustling satin, coattails slapping, and a shuffling that lasts long into the night. There are even a few, Grandpa added, who claim they've seen the Scarecrow's waltz. Then Grandpa and Grandma took Sarah by the hand, and together they twirled round and round. One night, after Sarah had returned home from her summer visit to Grandpa and Grandma's farm, she sat at her bedroom window. Outside, leaves rustled on the trees, and the full moon hung low in the sky. Sarah had an idea. She opened the closet and took out her old velvet party dress. Just then, a soft knock sounded at her bedroom door. Her mother peeked in. "This dress is too small for me," said Sarah. "I'm going to send it to Grandma and Grandpa." "What are your grandparents going to do with an old party dress?" asked her mother. Sarah smiled. She knew Grandma and Grandpa would know just what to do. The end.